No, they're giving us the go-ahead now.
Okay, thank you. Welcome. This is our League's first in-person candidate forum since December 2021. It's co-sponsored by the Women's Group of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation, which has been an amazing partner, as they have been for many years, and to the brand new Great Neck League. There is no flag here, okay. My name is Regina Gouvenier, and I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Port Washington and Manhasset. Our thanks go particularly to all people in the UUC Women's Group, our co-sponsors, who have participated with us in planning this forum. Our thanks also go to North Shore TV, which is both broadcasting this event and then doing post-production work to make the videos we post on our League's YouTube channel accessible to the hearing impaired. This is more challenging than it sounds. And finally, we thank Disability Rights New York, which has partnered with the League across New York to make candidate forums more accessible for the hearing impaired. It has supplied American Sign Language interpreters for the North Shore TV's broadcast and YouTube, as well as manual transcribers for closed captioning of high quality. Closed captions are accessible here tonight by focusing your camera on the QR code image on any of the purple signs on the doors. As you know, the League is nonpartisan. We never support or oppose any political party or candidate. Our mission is to engage you, the voters, by allowing all candidates for a given office to answer voters' questions in a fair and structured way, while maintaining civil discourse. Before we begin, I want to thank all the members of our League who have joined together to make these forums happen. Our team has worked tirelessly to make these forums just to meet the needs of the candidates and the public, and making sure these needs are met. Many of you have submitted questions through our advertised portals. We have collected these. If you have not yet submitted a question and wish to do so, please raise your hand and someone will bring an index card and pen. Raise your hand again to have the card collected. Put the name of the one office of your card, for example, New York Senate, if it's a question for the New York Senate candidates, or New York Assembly, if it's a question for the Assembly candidates or Congress. Our collectors will stop collecting cards at the half-hour mark at each forum. So at 6:30, they will stop collecting the cards. At 7:30, and again at 8:30, they'll stop. Tonight, our vetters will be Judy Esterquist and Maggie Gao sitting at the table here. Our timers would be Marie Bellin and Nikki Willard. Other members will be collecting cards and monitoring doors, including 2 high school students. We often describe our mission as making democracy work. This includes all our voter services work, such as these forums, which let candidates speak directly to voters on issues that matter. We also educate voters and advocate with legislators on public policies, such as voting, election reform, redistricting, and natural resources, and healthcare. We hope you'll consider joining our League. They have an information table in the art gallery, or you can use a QR code to join, and you can also make a donation on our website, lwv.pwm.org. Also on the table are paper membership forms, along with other information, such as flyers promoting our November 1st author event, On Contract to Unite America by Neil Simon, a noted independent who offers reforms to reduce political polarization. The event is free and open to the public and is offered in the Port Washington Public Library. And we also offer information on the Nassau County Temporary Redistricting Commission, which is holding hearings about the boundaries all of us will live with for the next decade. Public comment matters, whether in writing or oral commentary. Remember, our League of Women Voters is also not for women only. I'll now hand the podium over to Lisa Scott from the Huntington League, who will serve as our moderator for this evening. Per our rules, Lisa is not eligible to vote in any of these elections. for any of the candidates that will be presenting here on the podium. She will first read our rules and procedures. We will then move to opening statements and questions from the audience, for the audience. Please note that we are asking each candidate to begin their opening with a visual description so that visually impaired listeners here and in the virtual world can imagine their appearance. And Lisa, the forum is yours. Look the wrong way. All yours.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Regina. I'll just make one correction. I don't live in Huntington. I actually live in St. James, and I'm the president of the League of Suffolk County. So I'm even further removed from the candidates' districts. For over a century, the League of Women Voters have sought to make democracy work by promoting civil discourse to nonpartisan events so that voters like you can hear the views and observe the behavior of candidates on a range of issues relevant to this community, using procedures that promote civil discourse and a fair process. I want to review debate procedures. All candidates have agreed to these, and for being here tonight, you, as the audience, have also agreed to large signs outside the entrance. I'll read the guidelines. The moderator will be a member of the League of Women Voters from outside the district. Candidates' opening statements have been determined by their drawing lots beforehand. In this case, Mr. Martins drew the first lot, so he'll start with his opening statement, and Ms. Kaplan will go second, and then it'll be the same order for the close. So Mr. Martins will close first, and Ms. Kaplan will close second. Each candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for an opening statement. Timers. After all candidates have spoken, the moderator will open the meeting with questions received in advance and questions received on index cards from the audience. If you have a question, raise your hand for a card or to submit a card. I will remind you again, as Regina said, that they have to be submitted by 1:30 for each of the debates. That's obviously to try to merge them into the questions that we already have. As an aside, part of my job is to make sure we cover a variety of topics. So the idea is, unfortunately, we don't have time to drill down multiple times. So it's really up to the candidates in the short time they have to really get to the gist of each of these topics. And they'll have time in the close to really restate what the messages they'd like to get across. In all cases, I will be the final arbiter of whether questions should be answered, and all the questions will be vetted prior to being asked. Duplicative, personal, abusive, or biased questions will not be used. Each candidate will get 90 seconds to answer each question. At the moderator's discretion, the time for a response might be reduced so long as it's the same for both candidates. There will be no rebuttal. Questions will be asked of both candidates each time. And I will alternate. So Ms. Kaplan will take the first question, and then Mr. Martins will get the second, and we'll go around that way. A league member will act as timekeeper. A half a minute before the end of any given time period, the timekeeper will alert the speaker by a prearranged signal, waving wildly at us. Candidates who ignore time signals may have their speaking time reduced, and/or those not violating the rules might be given extra time. And the candidates have seen the signs, so you're familiar with that. Since the purpose of the meeting is to determine the candidate's views, no substitutes for the in-person candidate will be allowed to appear if a candidate couldn't attend. No written or recorded statement may be provided in lieu of active participation by candidates, and forums require 2 or more candidates for each seat to be present. Candidates may not use props, charts, or visuals, and we do not allow the display of campaign collateral. And finally, in accordance with league policy, audio or video recording by authorized members of the media will be permitted only if all the candidates present agree. The league maintains the right to record the forum and publish it on league-controlled electronic pages. No other recording will be allowed. No partial transcript or recording may be published without written permission from the league. And there's more. Like you, we are all here tonight because we believe that citizenship requires both knowledge and civic engagement, and that the responsibility of maintaining good government rests on the shoulders of citizens, that is, on everyone here. So we have expectations for you, the attendees. The UUC requests absolutely no food or liquids in this worship hall, not even water. Please step outside. Civility rules, always important. Please be seated and avoid blocking any exits. Applaud at the beginning and end only. As moderator, I'll have to stop the debate if there is an interruption, applause, or comment. These reduce the time for candidates to speak, and we're here to listen to the candidates' views, not the audience views. Audience questions should fit on one side of the card and be questions, not extended statements. As the moderator, again, I retain the right to rephrase or combine the questions. If you brought campaign literature buttons, please hand them to a league member who will give them back to you at the end. Turn off your cell phones or silence them now. To repeat, we only permit authorized recordings. Taking clips or segments is also not authorized. And please, if you violate these procedures, we'll have to ask you to leave the auditorium. We thank you all for being here to learn more from each of the candidates who seek to represent you. Now, applaud. Okay. All right, so I will give a copy of the questions to the vetters. And Mr. Martins, it's yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming out this evening. It is a pleasure to be here with you. I want to thank the League for once again sponsoring a debate. I think it is extraordinarily important that we come together and share ideas, answer questions, and have an opportunity as candidates to stand or sit side by side and answer questions, hopefully to everyone's satisfaction. I want to thank the Unitarian Universalist Church, who has always opened their home to us and allowed the opportunity for us to come and speak. And I want to thank Anna, and I want to thank you very much for being here as well, because I think this is how these things should actually work. My name is Jack Martins. I am running for the 7th Senate District. I am the Republican and conservative candidate on the ballot this year. Married to Paula for 27 years, father to Caitlin, Vanessa, Emma, and Caroline. Caitlin with us today. And in a prior life, served as the mayor of Mineola from 2003 to 2010. Was elected to the state senate in 2010, representing the 7th Senate District, where I served for 3 terms through 2016. In keeping with our instructions, I am 5'10". I have brown, grayish hair, more gray than brown these days. And once upon a time, I think well, I'll move on since I have 30 seconds. I'll leave it to this. We're at a crossroads in this state. An election is about the last 2 or 4 years. It's a referendum on the past. And we have an opportunity to ask ourselves, are we better off today than we were 2 and 4 years ago? When we talk about things like public safety, the economy, the direction of the state, I'm looking forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martins.
I just have a question. We can't use the podium.
No,
Okay.
no. It's all set. They've done all kinds of
No
checks,
worries.
so you're in a good
All
spot. Ms. Kaplan.
I'm a petite woman with black hair and brown eyes. We all watched in horror on January 6th as insurrectionists incited by Donald Trump attacking our democracy. As a political refugee, all I could do that day, think to myself, how could this be happening in America? I came to this country at age 13 alone because my parents had to make the impossible decision to send me here for my safety. My birth country had been overtaken by a far-right regime that stole the rights of women, minorities, and Jews like me. And right now, the Republican extremists in this country are fighting like hell to grab power, to rob women of our reproductive rights, to overturn our gun laws, and to dismantle the very foundation of our democracy. But I refuse to let them. As your state senator, I wrote the law that makes New York a safe haven for women in New York and women from anti-choice states. I wrote the laws that gets dangerous guns out of our community. I fought back against rise in hate crimes. When I came to this country at age 13, I wasn't scared. I knew I could work hard and make my American dream come true. As the first ever refugee elected to New York State Senate, as the only Democratic woman state senator on Long Island, I am the living example of what we can do when we stand together. I am asking for your support in November election so that the next generation can live their American dream like I did.
Thank you to our
Thank you.
candidates for your opening statements. So the first question, we'll start with Ms. Kaplan. Do you agree or disagree that families are leaving New York State to get away from high taxes, unnecessary, quote, state of emergency declarations, loss of parental rights regarding children's education and health care, and more? What legislative actions will you undertake to improve life in New York State to convince people to stay?
First and foremost, I'm biased to New York. But I know we're coming out of a pandemic, and it's been a very, very difficult time for everyone in this state and in the country. That's why it was important when I went to Albany my first year, I passed the permanent property tax cap. I cut the middle class tax to the lowest it has been in the decades. I put an average of $1,400 back into the pockets of taxpayers, middle-class homeowners in my district through a rebate this year. And I cut the gas tax because right here in Long Island, we depend on our cars to get everywhere. And I made sure the county followed my lead. As the chair of Small Business Committee, I fought for small businesses. And I'm so proud to have the endorsement of the Business Council because they've seen the work that I do for businesses throughout the state. big advocate for families and businesses here in New York, and I will continue to be that advocate moving forward.
Thank you. Mr. Martins?
Yes, I do agree that people are leaving New York State. I do agree that
Yeah.
Yes, I do agree that people are leaving New York State. I do believe that they're leaving because the cost of living in New York is too high, taxes are too high. I do believe that when a state increases spending from $160 billion to $220 billion in just 6 years, it's a bad thing because it means that that money is coming out of our pocket. I do believe that when people are more afraid of crime, they're concerned and they leave. I think when people are afraid of state mandates, such as legislators handing over authority to a governor to impose unilateral mandates on families and schools throughout New York State, I think that sends the wrong message. And yes, I lament the fact that we live in a state where these things have happened, but I do think there's an opportunity to fix it, and we can fix it this year. We had enacted, when I was in the state senate, a 2% spending cap year over year, similar to the cap that was in place for local government. If it made sense for our schools and our villages and our towns and counties, it made sense for the state. Do the math. $160 billion to $220 billion, they blew through that and spent. And again, they're projecting deficits in just 4 years. Parental rights, the way that our parents have an absolute right to make decisions for their children, has to be protected, whether at home or in school, and we've gotten away from that. We have to get back to fundamentals, protect our family structure, protect our communities, support law enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me, Ms. Kaplan, we're not doing rebuttals. What I would suggest to both of you is be sure to take notes and come back and address this in your close, okay? Because we don't have a vast amount of time and we want to get covered a bunch of ground. Also, if I could ask the timers when you put up the 30-second, leave it up, because a lot of the candidates are looking at notes and writing things down. I want to make sure they're warned when the time is closing in. So,
defund the police movement that has unfortunately talk about legislative action that has been taken in Albany that frankly has made our communities less safe. Now they'll tell you that's not true. They'll tell you that there are statistics showing that crime is on the rise everywhere in the country, but here's what I know. Growing up in my community, in Mineola, down in Old Westbury, I can tell you that I never had to lock the door in my home, ever. I never had to worry about somebody breaking into my car. I never had to worry about those things. And today, if you have a ring, you get neighborhood alerts. It seems like every 5 minutes. People are afraid, and we need to take action, not only to support law enforcement, we need to repeal cashless bail, we need to give judges the authority that they have in this criminals behind bars once and for all, and we need to stand together because this shouldn't be happening not only in our communities here on Long Island, but certainly not anywhere else, including New York City. We deserve it. Thank you.
Yes, I've said this before, I will say it again. My record is clear. I support fully funding police. I have a legislation that gives $500 million additional money to our law enforcement. I brought back millions for our local police and have built relationship with all of the police departments here in my district. I've been the leading voice for common fixes to our bail laws, where we take repeat offenders and violent criminals off of our streets. And we have given judges more discretion to keep our communities safe. All along, my extremist Republicans, all they want to do is roll back our sensible safety gun laws to put back more dangerous guns in our community. Ladies and gentlemen, we can't let extremists take over our communities. We can't let them rob us out of our safe streets, safe schools, and safe houses of worship. I fought for you before, and I will continue to fight for you and your public safety.
Thank you. Ms. Calvin, next one is yours. Last year, the American Academy of Pediatrics, who are a partner in this forum as well, they've submitted several questions, say the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and the Children's Hospital Association declared a national state of emergency in children's mental health. How would you work to ensure equitable access to children's mental health services in pediatric offices, clinics, and school health sites?
So I'm proud to say that in this year's budget, we put a lot of funding for mental health. We also put in funding extra for our schools so that they can hire social workers, so that they can give that one-on-one attention to children. We do know mental health is a big issue here in this country. And with the pandemic, it had brought it up to the surface. We also put in funding that allows people to go ahead and have access to professionals and to be able to do it remotely. Those are the ways that we have tried to work and make sure that we're dealing with mental health. It is something that's very important to all of us, especially our children. We want to make sure that we do everything in our power to give them the tools and the resources for them not only to succeed, but to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mark.
Sure, thank you. You know, you can't talk about a child, or should we discuss children, without talking about their parents, talking about the family unit, the need to support that family unit, decisions that are being made. So yes, the COVID pandemic was traumatic for adults, for all of us, but more so for children. Going to school every day, when they weren't allowed to go to school, wearing masks. Being at home, not having to wear a mask, but being told if you go to school, you have to wear that mask as well. There needs to be consistency in policy. That policy needs to include local stakeholders, and most importantly, needs to include the parents of every child when it comes to making decisions. So yes, if there are resources available, there should be resources. Have to be. Work with our families, with our doctors, with our schools, to make that happen, make that possible. Now, we will hopefully never face the kind of pandemic, the kind of adversity that we did during the past few years. We have to work together to get through some of the trauma that is still there. But gosh, it doesn't happen without parents. We can't keep our parents at home. Thank you.
Mr. Martin, this one is the Supreme Court has signaled that they're willing to reconsider the decision that made marriage equality legal across the nation. Do you support efforts to strengthen and support marriage equality in the state?
Yes, I do. I think it's a fundamental human right that when two people love each other and want to come together as a family unit, they have the ability to do that. some of you may ask, weren't you in the Senate in 2011 when we had an opportunity to vote for that? I was, and I did vote against it. That was a mistake. I was in favor of civil unions at the time, but it passed. And what a wonderful thing it is that we have couples who have got married, who have raised children, and had families. I think it's been great. And so, regardless of what Justice Clarence Thomas may opine from his opinion on the U.S. Supreme Court, I don't see that happening here in New York, and certainly I would oppose it.
Thank you. I have to tell you, in 2011, I was a councilwoman for town of North Hempstead. And I was so proud to be able to perform same-sex marriages. Our town clerk at the time decided that all of the same-sex marriages were going to come to me. And I was proud to stand there and perform every single one of them. On the other hand, my opponent just told you himself that in 2011, he voted against it. And then, years later, when he was asked about it, he doubled down and defended his vote. And tonight he's telling us he's for it. Ladies and gentlemen, we just saw what the extremist Supreme Court did in June, rolling back a 50-year-old law. And they have told us they are coming next for marriage equality. At a time like this, we can't trust an anti-choice and anti-marriage equality representative anywhere close to Albany. We need a proven leader like you to fight for your
Thank you. We will now pause, and we will not hear as many questions as we have. I ask you to report. Ms. Kaplan? In 2020, gun violence became the single leading cause of death in American children and teens, higher than any other pediatric medical problem or injury. What legislation do you think would have the greatest impact on reversing this heartbreaking trend?
So it was 2018. I was a councilwoman for town of North Hempstead. One day I got a call from a student, a high school student who couldn't even drive, asking me for a meeting. Came and sat down in my office across my table and talked about Parkland shooting and what happened there and how scared he was and his friends were going to school. It broke my heart. Broke my heart as a mother and as an elected. And then I was told that the sitting senator, the sitting Republican senator, wouldn't meet with him. It was right then and there that I decided I was going to run for this seat, to make sure that I do everything in my power to keep our children safe, to keep our communities safe, and to pass legislations to take dangerous guns out of our community. My opponent, again, on the other side, in one of his last elections, was endorsed by gun lobbyists. It is important for us to stand together against gun violence in this country. I'm proud of all the legislations that I've passed. I'm proud of passing the ghost guns, the 80% finished receiver guns. I've fought for your safety for the last 4 years, and I will continue to fight for your safety as your New York State Senator.
Thank you. Mr. Marcus.
You know, I'm going to take 10 seconds to answer this question, and I'll respond to some of the personal comments that have been made. Ladies and gentlemen, my rating with the NRA is an F. doesn't happen by accident. It happens because I have I think, rational view of gun use. I voted for the SAFE Act. I did so because I don't believe that we should have military-type weapons available to children or adults in our communities. So we use the word, this gathering uses the word extremist. I remember a time when we used to have a dialogue, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, and you have a discussion. I had the opportunity to serve with Assemblywoman Michelle Schimmel and work with great local elected officials from the other side of the aisle, and we worked together because we were able to have a dialogue. Never once did we get to a point where we referred to another person as an extremist. That's a personal attack on an individual, and how are you supposed to have a conversation with somebody when they're throwing rocks in that way? The other point I'll make, because I have some time, I think I have about 15 seconds, is that Ms. Kaplan said I doubled down on my opposition to marriage equality. That didn't happen. It didn't happen. And so let's stay to the facts. Let's stay to the facts, and we can take it from there. But let's stay to the facts, please. Honestly.
I'll get back to you.
Okay, in your closing, please. We'll move on to the next question. Okay, Mr. Martins. There's been a challenge recently in the New York court system about absentee voting. As I recall, it was Saratoga County, and it related to excuses for absentee voting applications. Do you support this sort of challenge, and do you believe absentee voting has gone too far?
I believe that voting, the right to vote, is a fundamental right that we have as citizens that everyone should exercise. If we make it easier for people to vote, we have a responsibility to do so, with the caveat that we have to make sure that it's also done properly, that there are safeguards in place to make sure that every vote that is made is actually a valid vote. I think that's a reasonable compromise when we discuss access to the ballot, as well as the importance of the right to vote. Now, I would defer to there being greater access to the right to vote, greater access to the ballot, even by absentee ballots, certainly during times of crisis. What I was, frankly, offended by was the effort by some to send out pre-filled out ballots that have already been marked with COVID as an excuse for the absentee ballot, sent out by one political party, not mine, where they essentially took the choice out of the person's hands and invited them to fill out a form by simply signing it, having already filled it out for them. There's no place for that kind of gamesmanship with something as important as the electoral process. So yes, greater access. No to trying to game the system for one political party over the other. Thank you.
Yes, I'm going to take 10 seconds to rebut. When you are running on the same ticket as Lee Zeldin and George Santos, who compares abortion to slavery, I think I'm right to say you are extremists. Now, with regard to voting, I am so proud to say, my first year again in New York State Senate, we worked hard to make sure we expand voting rights. This issue is very personal to me because I come from a country that I didn't have a right to vote. I didn't have a constitutional right to be heard. And I was so proud to cast my vote for making absentees voting more accessible, to have exercise and have early voting, and to also fight and pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act at a time in this country when our, again, Republican Party is fighting us every step of the way and attacking our democracy and our questioning the integrity of our election, it is important to have someone who will stand up and fight and make sure that every individual has a right to vote. Thank you.
Ms. Scalper, the next question starts with you. Will you support legislation that will bring universal, affordable health care to all New Yorkers? If so, how should it be paid for, and what will you do to achieve it? If not, why not?
I've been in New York State Senate for the last 4 years. And when I went in, there was already a bill for universal health care. And after reviewing the bill and talking to a lot of stakeholders, I really saw that the bill was not a sustainable, responsible bill. And that's why I'm not one of the people who co-sponsored that bill. I think healthcare is human care. We need to be able to provide healthcare, a good healthcare to everyone. Well, this is too big for us to do and fail. We need to make sure that what we pass is a careful, responsible, and sustainable legislation. With that said, this year alone, we tried to expand and make sure that more people can purchase and have a healthcare that could work for them. We need to do that, and I'm so happy to say that I've been endorsed by so many unions, over 20 unions, who have a lot of members and who support us. And I want to make sure that everyone's voice is being heard. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree that we do not have a path to universal health care, certainly not one that is run by the state of New York. The cost estimates for universal health care in New York State are over $400 billion, and I'm certainly not going to entrust the state government to manage health care across the state. I do think we have to do a better job at providing access to health care, making sure that nobody falls through the cracks, and that the safety net that we have to help people have access to health care is frankly there to cover everybody. Now, I have spoken to healthcare leaders. The bill that is being proposed, besides being extraordinarily difficult and costly and frankly bankrupting the state, it's unsustainable, it doesn't work, it just frankly doesn't make sense. However, we have to do more, and I think there is a place for the state to do that. We support our local hospitals, we support our local healthcare systems. We happen to live in a singular place in the world where we are fortunate enough to have some of the finest hospitals that have access to health care of anyone in the world, between the different systems that we have here. It does have to be accessible to everyone, and with the state's participation, we can make that more so. Now, when we talk about healthcare, it is free. There is no one who should not have access to healthcare and the ability to walk into a hospital at any time and get the care that they need. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kim? Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to put one more question, and then we'll go to the close, since we lost a bit of time. So we'll go until 7. We're going to start before that. Mr. Martin, this goes with you. New York State Senate is technically a part-time job, but we've seen many instances of corruption over the years related to senators having outside jobs that conflict with their elected office. Do you support a ban on outside income for state legislators, similar to what Congress has? And do you commit to working full-time as a senator, or will you maintain a second job before that?
I will maintain my job if elected to the state Senate. I am an attorney, and I have practice law and practice, and I have clients, and I'm going to continue to practice law. Very, very much aware of conflicts and pitfalls that come up, frankly, for those who do have outside employment and those who don't have outside employment. So, to answer your question, I do and will continue to work when elected. But I do want to stress the fact that there are safeguards in place. And if the state were to decide that that is the course that we're going to go, something that they have not done to this point, certainly that would factor into my consideration as to whether or not it makes sense for me and my family and my responsibilities to my family as well. So as of right now, I will continue to work.
Thank you. Ms. Calvin.
So, I have the pleasure and honor of being New York State Senator for District 7 for the last 4 years. And to answer it very clearly, yes, I want to put a ban on outside income. I have a legislation on that, and I'm going to try very hard to get it to the finish line next year. I believe, conflicts aside, we represent over 330,000 people. In the last 4 years that I've been in the office, I've seen what it takes to represent people. And in order to do this job well, you have to be out with your constituents on weekends, on weeknights, during the day. And it's not only a full-time job, it takes much longer. And I think we owe it to our residents to do the best job possible. And having another job will make it, this job is already difficult enough, and to have another job on top of it, it will make really life so much more difficult than everyone. You, the residents, deserve the best. You need the sole attention and the work of your representative. Thank you.
Okay, and that concludes, unfortunately, the limited amount of time we had to cover questions. We did have more. Sorry, couldn't get to them all. So we'll have 2 minutes for the closing statements. Again, we'll repeat the opening order. So Mr. Martins gets his 2 minutes, and then Ms. Kaplan. And then at that point, we'll take a short recess while we set up the room. There are refreshments outside in the gallery, and you'll have to stay out there. And we're going to start setting up again at about 5 after, so we won't have a lot of time. The restrooms are downstairs.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank the League, Washington-Manhasset Universalist Church, and everyone here for having come out today. You can be anywhere tonight, and here honors us. It really comes down to a decision of whether or not this state is heading in the right direction or not. Whether or not we're better off today than we have been, and whether or not we need change. I had the opportunity and the privilege of serving as the state senator for the 7th Senate District for 3 terms. At a time when there was balance in Albany and there was give and take. At a time when people did not call each other extremists, but sat down and discussed issues in terms of finding common ground. We had success. We paid off a $13 billion deficit. We passed a property tax cap. We worked together to deal with environmental issues here on Long Island, water quality issues. Again, Republicans and Democrats working together and not throwing stones. During those 6 years, coincidentally, I had the opportunity to do so while working. And I was able to work and continue to serve my constituents. And I was able to attend events at night. And yes, it was a sacrifice, but I was able to do it, and I will continue to do it. I was able to watch my children grow up. But this is really more about the future. It's a question of what do you want going forward, understanding that we do have people in Albany who have voted to undermine our quality of life here, who have taken votes to undermine minimize and limit our energy such that we're not looking at $6 and $7 per gallon home heating oil to heat our homes in the winter. That's the decision we have to make. Thank you.
Again, I would like to thank first the league and also you for opening that home to all of us tonight. Thank you. When I came to the United States as a refugee, the American values of freedom, equality, and democracy were not some abstract ideals, but lived experiences that I had been denied during my childhood. I believe fiercely in the American dream and the capacity of government to make people's lives better. It's why I ran for the office in the first place. It's also why the rise in the far-right extremism is so important to combat. From increasing hate, to the theft of women's rights, to horrifying events of January 6th. We have so much at stake this November. Women's rights, gun violence, marriage equality are all on the ballot. I'm focused on fighting back against the rising tide of extremism and winning. To ensure that New York remains a safe haven for women, people of color, the LGBTQ community, and all who believe in the values that make America a beacon of hope. To those looking for a safer, better future, just like I once did. As the only Democratic state senator on Long Island, I know firsthand that the issues which are prioritized by our elected officials change when a woman has a seat at the table. I'm asking for your support in November 8th election so that we can all continue fighting for civil rights, equality, and delivering results for Long Island communities. Thank you. Thank you all.
So we'll take a 5-minute break, sandwiches, cookies, coffee, water.
Okay. Yeah. Tell me you know what's going on.
We'll try to change that by back.
Way the system is that the other direction. This side faces the candidate. Will appeal to a greater percentage of the electorate. Because this polarization is unwritten, and the tribalism around my team versus your team is not good.
You will be glad to know I was part of a think tank in Manhattan about 12 years ago. They were talking about the president's saying, I said, presidents come and go. Their actions can be offended. It is dangerous. There's a polarization that is happening.
Yes.
My way or highway.
Yes.
That's what is happening.
It becomes like a religion.
It becomes
Whereas public policy, government service, ought to be about achieving the best public policy for each issue that we need to do. Good luck to you. I need to go find out what crisis isn't getting solved.
right. That's right.
For some reason, I appear to be the focus.
Right. Very well. Thank you, sir. lucky they don't allow water.
I know.
And before we start, were all of you here for the state senate one pretty much?
Some.
You're not particularly looking forward for me to read the entire thing that I read before. Okay. All right. Just in case someone, though, who's viewing it as it's being recorded, I'm just going to remind people of a few things, okay? All right. So, welcome again. Our next debate this evening is for the Assembly 16th District, and we have Miss, where am I? Let me get all my papers here. Ms. Stoliti, and Mr. Jha. Okay. Again, what we will do is give each of the candidates 2 minutes for an opening statement. They've drawn lots. Ms. Stoliti, is first, and Mr. Jha second, and at the very end, we'll do the same thing. We'll try to cover some ground. We have different questions for the assembly seats, and you will have 90 seconds, a minute and a half for each question. There are no rebuttals. We've asked the timers to keep the 90-second sign up so that the candidates know they've got to think about closing out then. Again, we ask the audience to please not applaud. We're going to applaud before they start and very much at the end as they leave the room, and then we'll take a short break and then do CD3. But since we're running a bit late, we will get started. The guidelines that they've agreed to are the same as the first. If you weren't here, they're posted out on an easel out there. And if you have questions and want to submit them, there are cards. The people here are vetting them so we don't ask duplicate questions. And we have to close that off in about 15 minutes because I have to filter them in with other questions. We never get to them all. So without further ado, why don't we start with your opening statement?
Sure. So good evening, everyone. My name is Gina Soliti. I am your New York State Assemblywoman. For those who are listening, I was asked to describe myself. I am wearing a black jacket, a gray blouse, purple skirt. I am Italian-American. I knocked on a door recently and a woman told me I have the map of Italy on my face, so if that gives you an indication of what I look like. I have long black curly hair, which I wear on top of my head. So, again, thank you for hosting this forum. I have been in office for about 1 year and 10 months now. Prior to that, I worked for nearly 20 years in various levels of government. I understand how the process works. I can navigate it. I love this job. I love working for the people. I love identifying problems and looking for solutions. You know, I have delivered for this district since I've come into the office, from securing record school funding to money for infrastructure programs. I humbly ask for your vote this November so I can continue the great work that we have done in the 16th Assembly District. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Shah, your opening statement.
Thank you, everybody, for being here, and I'm delighted and honored to be entering the political arena in America. The short description: I'm big, 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, big, bald, and not so beautiful. I came to this country way back in 1991. I was in the senior management role with American Express Bank. I'm from India. I was in corporate banking and private banking over there, and when India was opening up, removing itself from the clutches of socialism, India launched its India Liberalization Program. I call myself very proudly belonging to the band of a few good men who brought the story here to this part of the world. And I organized the first ever Doing Business with India seminar in this country and did many more. And we have done some fabulous joint ventures which have created employment and opportunities on both sides of the aisle. Prior to the American Express, I was with the Reserve Bank of India, which is the counterpart of Federal Reserve System here, in compliance, control, and foreign exchange department. I have an enormous business experience. I have dealt with companies and corporations solving problems. And what is my life story? I always keep configuring myself. What have I done? What's today and what's tomorrow? And I came to this conclusion that I'm a problem solver. If you were to define me as an individual, I'm a problem solver. I'm a coach. I'm a consultant, and I solve the problems. I have an affiliation. I'm an investor partner in a company, in Seattle-based company, Human Potential Project. We work on turnaround strategies. In that, we have understood that if you have a problem, it can be solved, provided you want to solve it. And as I see it today, as you all know, we have some problems, and they need to be solved. And the traditional element of politics will not work anymore. We need new insights. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Okay, so Mr. Shah, you get the first question, which is crime is spiking in Nassau County. Do you believe it's caused by cashless bail laws? What legislative actions will you take to reduce crime in District 16 and throughout New York State?
Thank you. In 1991, when I came here, my director of international HR in American Express told me, always carry $20 in your pocket and wear a cheap watch. If you are accosted and held up, give it away. The element of crime was very big in New York City. It changed dramatically under Mayor Giuliani's rule. I've seen New York City evolve, become a tourist attraction. The important part is that today, as I see this country, crime is on the rise. Today, my heart goes out to the 2 police officers in Connecticut who were ambushed. Confidence. Somewhere along the line, the criminal intent of people is getting encouraged by a cashless bail system where you have in Long Island, a major department store no longer reports to police that people are stealing things because they don't want a police case happening. Think about it from that perspective. This society is based on trust, confidence, and rule of law. Rule of law doesn't mean gun. Rule of law means discipline. That's what is important to understand. Legislation, I have a few thoughts on that. I'm lucky in the sense that I have not been in the politics before. I'm entering public service because I'm entering this arena because I feel there are things are not okay and they need to be fixed.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So crime is up across our country. You know, many of the changes that were mentioned here tonight happened before I was elected, but let me tell you what's happened since I've been elected. We've made common sense changes to bail reform, gave judges more discretion for repeat offenders. Think car thefts, catalytic converters. We added more gun crimes to bail eligible offenses. We made fixes to discovery laws while also giving DAs more money. We've given more money to our state troopers. I've gotten grants for our local police to keep us safe. I know we can prioritize public safety the right way, and law enforcement trusts me to do that. That's why I've received the endorsement of law enforcement in New York. Nassau County PBA, Nassau County detectives, Nassau Superior officers, New York State Troopers, and the New York Conference of Police. I have the full support of law enforcement. I will be in the room fighting for us. They know that. They know that they can trust me. I hope you will too, and know that I will fight for you and the public safety of everyone in the 16th Assembly District.
Okay, thank you. And now you get the next question, which is long, so listen.
Which is what?
The question is longer than your answer, okay. This past July, New York State Assembly and Senate passed the Equality Amendment. It reads, quote, "No person shall be denied the equal protection of the laws of this state," unquote. And it codifies protections of human rights in New York State, including full access to reproductive care. To amend the New York State Constitution, both chambers need to pass it again next spring, and then it will be sent to voters. First, how will you vote next spring, if elected? In favor or against? And how will you explain or defend your position to your constituency prior to their voting on it as a referendum in November next year?
Sure, happy to answer that question. I voted yes this year, and I plan on voting yes again for the Equality Amendment. You know, this came about particularly with Roe being overturned. 50 years of precedent, 50 years of protecting a woman's right to choose was ended abruptly. New York fought back, won with measures to protect a woman, protect doctors from retaliation, from criminality, but also the Equality Amendment. Now, I've knocked on doors, I've talked to folks, and they say, why are we worried about Roe? Why are we worried about the Equality Amendment? We're fine here in New York. Well, what I say to them is, you're fine here in New York because you have representatives like me fighting for you. And I will continue to do that, and I will proudly vote yes on the Equality Amendment because I'm unapologetically pro-choice.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jacques?
Thank you. This is a question which is rather fascinating because it's about freedom, about choice, and varieties of other issues involved. People have a right to marry who they want to marry. But there is something like a God-ordained way. Man is man, woman is woman, and there are in between. But the important part is equality. Roe versus Wade, for that matter. You know, I think the Supreme Court took a wise decision. It may have angered a group of people, but this is a wonderful country with states having the right to choose what they want to do. It is as much unfair for Texas to impose their conditionalities on New York as it is for New York to impose its conditionalities on Wisconsin or Tennessee. There has to be an independent respect for what people of each region want to do. And the issue is not about abortion. The issue is about the whether the Constitution talks about this particular right. So people have the right in the New York State. I live here, and it's perfectly fine. It is already coded. Nobody's changing that. So it is perfectly fine to have that element. But equality of marriage, people are free to choose their partners, who they want to live with, because marriage is not about living unhappily ever after. Marriage is about a creative pursuit of happiness, wherever you get it from, whatever is your pursuit of creative happiness. So I'm all for that part, equality. If it comes to that, there is an important thing here. Sorry, I will stop here. I didn't see that.
Okay, and again, I've told the candidates if they want to revisit anything in their closing statement, they can. So, Mr. Jha, you start with the next one. This is a short one.
Okay.
What is your record or your hopes about supporting union labor?
I come from a country that has always been a socialist country until now, and we had various forms of labor unions, very active, very aggressive. I've dealt with them. At the end of the day, labor unions are also people. The enterprise succeeds because people work there. What is important for us to do, the environment that I worked in Reserve Bank of India, they had very powerful unions. You have to reason it out. There is one thing very important for the management to consider, is that if you have the ability to do something right in time, do it. That's one of the nicest way to improve the relationship and trust. It's all about trust and confidence. It's nothing about this legislation or that legislation. The labor and the ownership, they have to work together because both of them have to coexist. There is no way that one can work and one can just have fun. So the point of the matter is, my opinion on the labor union is, yes, they also have to be responsible. You just can't strike work because it's part of your whims and fancies. The demands have to be reasonable, and the attendance to those demands have to be reasonable. So unless and until we drop the extremities, we will never have agreements. And we have done that many times in our work life, that you bring people together in the way that you have common ground.
Thank you. Ms. Sullivan.
Absolutely. So I am a proud member of the Labor Committee in the New York State Assembly. I'm also proud to have the support and the endorsement of nearly every labor union representing New York: Long Island Federation of Labor, AFL-CIO, Nassau-Suffolk Building Trades, and the list goes on. This year, we brought record funding to Long Island, record funding for this district in the terms of infrastructure programs. Think repaving Northern Boulevard as one of those. These are projects that are going to bring good paying construction jobs to Long Island, that is going to get people back to work and raise the middle class. So I am a supporter of labor. I'm a supporter of the labor movement. They have built this country, built America, and they always have my back, and I'll have theirs.
Thank you. And I'm going to add a 30-second question on that for both of you. So what do you think the minimum wage should be? You first.
Me first. So I can give you a quick story, if that's okay. I mean, very short amount of time.
Very short.
Recently, there's a group of cleaning workers. They're members of 32BJ. They may be losing their job, and all because they negotiated just 50 cents more an hour. This is a part-time job for them. It's an after-work job, and all they want to do is have dignity in the workplace and a job that they could be proud of. It's not enough. It's not enough to make ends meet, certainly on Long Island. But at the same time, we have to work with, businesses are struggling at the same time. But we've seen that there's a labor shortage. Part of that has to do with the fact that the wages are just too low. And I'm in favor of increasing the minimum wage.
So let me just make sure. The question was, what would be the minimum wage that is that
The
it?
question was, what do you think the minimum wage should be?
I don't use the word should be, because should be is the most dangerous word in English language, because so many things should be, but they are not. The reality of the situation here is very important. There is nothing like a should be. It is a negotiated thing. How profitable the business is, that much they are able to part with it. So this is an issue that in management and labor have to determine what is the cost and what is the price one pays. And that's what you have to determine, what is the negotiated settlement for the wage structure that is, which is more than subsistence levels. So in the environment that I have worked, there was a pay scale in India. We had a government pay scale. This is the employment scale you get into, and that's all that was there for you. When I joined American Express, I negotiated my package, and then you perform to that package. So it is a mutually accepted situation. Should be is a dangerous word. I don't like to go into the hypotheticals, but we need to understand the basic premise of that. If McDonald's cannot afford, a McDonald's franchise cannot afford X amount of money, to them, if you tell them to pay more than $20, it is impossible. They will not survive. But somebody has lower cost of operations, they may be able to pay 20. So that's what is important to determine how profitable the business is. That's what will make things happen. And we need that negotiated out.
Okay, thank you. The next question, we continue, Mr. Jha. And the American Academy of Pediatrics is a partner in with us to give us some questions about children's health. So this one is, Congress provided to all students across New York State free lunch through the pandemic, and it ended in September. Inflation has been hard on family food budgets. Universal free lunch reduces stigma and supports all children having access to a healthy meal without identifying them as from a poor family. New York City already does this, but the rest of the state does not. Would you support it? Why or why not?
The things free is a bothersome thing, because whenever something is free, somebody is paying for it. Let's be very clear on that element. Nothing is free. Air is free, yes. Water is free, yes. God-given items. But we make money out of water selling now. But some days, in a very short time, somebody will market oxygen and make money out of that. What I'm trying to say here is, beware of those who tell you things doing for free, because somebody is paying for it. But I do agree, extraordinary times, extraordinary measures. Yes, COVID was an extraordinary time. And therefore, if the government felt that it had the surplus in the budget to pay for it, good for the community. So I am of the opinion that extremism or extremist viewpoints are dangerous for the community life, because extremes never bring us to a solution. Extremes drive us to extremity, a point of no return. And that's what is important for us to be aware of, that if something needs to be done, where is that money coming from? Once we make that determination, it becomes easier to do things. Like you said earlier on in the civil discourse, but we hope we are able to maintain a civil discourse, but we know Republicans are called deplorables, evil, extremists. Do you think I look such a person to you? That's my question. Am I such an extremist? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Salini.
Sure. So the answer would be yes to your question. Would be very okay with paying for a child's food. I understand the stigma surrounding walking up with that piece of paper, knowing that they know that you have a free or reduced lunch. And we saw during the pandemic that it didn't care what zip code you lived in. It struck us. It didn't matter who you were. It was the children were in need. Whether you're rich or you're poor, people lost their job and children needed to eat. So I like what the city does. We should be doing it everywhere. We shouldn't have to pay for kids. The children shouldn't have to pay for their food. 100%.
Okay, thank you. And we continue with you on the next question. To what extent do you believe parental rights and budget actions, particularly in education? What legislative action would you support or oppose to restore parental rights?
Sure. If you are referring to vaccines, books, curriculum, the schools are generally in charge of their curriculum. I have not voted for anything that would take parental rights away, but there are certain things that we mandate in New York that should be taught. For example, Holocaust education. That is something that is mandated in New York that our children should be taught. That would be something that I would believe should continue. But I understand that there are certain, issues that parents have concerns about, if their children are receiving in public school. I have been incredibly open to my constituents, whether we agree or not on this issue. I have met with people from vaccines to books to everything in between. I've heard their concerns, I've listened to them, and I told them that there are, things that we need to do from a public health standpoint, but there wouldn't be for example, polio vaccine, because, I have a feeling this is leading towards, this is a vaccine question. There are a lot of kids that are, 70% of people are vaccinated with polio, and we see a resurgence of polio. This is a disease that has literally been eradicated and is now back. This is something to keep our community safe. So in that regard, that would be something that I am supportive of mandating.
Thank you. Mr. Jha?
And it already is, P.S.
Thank you. Let me put it this way to you. Parents, there is no substitute for children than parents. Parental right has to be the uppermost for a child. It is absolutely essential that we do not do anything that disrupts parental right to look after their children. I believe, and I'm confirmed with my belief, there are only two entities in the universe that think about their children for totally unselfish reasons. They are father and mother. These are the two people who mean well to kids, that they do well in life, they are successful, nothing evil happens to them, they are healthy, and they do well. That's all I expect from my child. Do well. That's it. I have no expectation that he will look after me in my old age. What is happening in this country right now is a total degradation of the family values. There was a time, there is a statistics, that there was a time when children born out of wedlock was only 10%. Today it is more than 50%. Think about it like this. When children go through one parent, the other side is missing. There's a funny anecdote here. My son was, till 11 years of age, it was all mom all the way. It was all mom all the way. There came a day I was going for a walk, and he says, "Dad, I'm coming for a walk with you." And my wife said, "All this time it was mom, now what, Dad?" He says, "It's the guy thing, I'll tell you later." So there are things that change, and we have to remember that part. Parental rights is supreme.
Thank you. Ms. Sility? Right, okay. Next question starts with Mr. Jha again.
Okay.
Okay. A national state of emergency in children's mental health was declared by medical groups last year. How would you work to ensure equitable access to children's mental health services in pediatric offices, clinics, and school health sites?
If children are the future of the country, it is important that they're in every single aspect they are attended to, and they are supported in every single way. It begins from the family. And what is important here is that they need to be attended to. Their exposure, I'll give you one very important example. My son was in 5th grade in California when we came here, and that probably will explain my thought on it. He came to me and said, "I'm required to vote and give my opinion on Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill's case." I said, "What is that?" It was a famous case that I came to know about that later. I went to the school teacher, I said, "These guys, you don't even know what sex is, and you are asking them to vote and express an opinion on sexual abuse?" He said, "You are coming from a different cultural background, so you don't get it, but our children know everything." I was astonished. I said, "You are talking to a guy whose country gave the world the Kama Sutra. So don't tell me about that." So it is important for you to know that there is a time for everything, right? Just because you attain puberty doesn't mean you start doing whatever is allowed for you to do. Responsibility is there. Children in this country are under severe duress, and we as parents have to get involved. I have handled this matter with my son growing up here. This is not a 2-minute question or 2-minute answer, but I want to say children need mental support, busting their stress levels, putting them under undue pressure on their sexuality, on what they're taught, must stop.
Thank you. Ms. Sility.
I feel like I forgot what the question was. mental health, our children.
Children's mental health.
So there are two bills that are out there currently that address this very subject, and that would bring psychologists and mental health professionals in every single school. These kids before COVID were already on the edge. They were barely getting the services that they needed to get by. And then COVID came, we sent them home, and we put them in a room, and they couldn't get the services that they needed, and they were desperate, and they're desperate for help. I support those two bills. I hope we can get them passed next year. One thing that one school is doing, and not to single out any school district, but I went and I saw it and I got a tour of it, it was incredible. The Manhasset School District, we're very lucky where we live. Our schools are incredible. Not everybody is so lucky, but the Manhasset School District, in their secondary school, they have this wellness center, and they have resources for the kids. Or if they just want to go and sit, they have these like giant donuts where the kids can go and just relax and be and think and just be children, because at the end of the day, that's what we just want them to be. And it's a model. I think it's a model that other schools should follow. It's a model that I think will really help our children. And if I could be helpful in any way in our other school districts to make that happen, I will.
Okay, thank you. Also for you, the next question. What do you think New York State should do in light of the recent Dobbs decision to protect abortion and reproductive rights for all within this state?
Right. So I think we sort of touched on that a little bit before. Obviously that decision for me personally was devastating. I felt like my personal rights as a woman were under attack. But again, as I mentioned before, people have said, well, we're safe here in New York because we have, legislation to protect us. But at the end of the day, you have this legislation because you have representatives that believe in a woman's right to choose, that are passing these bills that will protect you and protect your right to choose. But a couple of things that we've done, I mentioned it, there was legislative measures that we passed immediately following that decision. It was a series of measures that protected doctors and healthcare providers from retaliation, which I thought was important because women are going to be coming here from other states, states that are banning abortion outright, that have outright bans in even the most extreme cases, rape, incest, and the health of the mother. They don't care, but they come to New York because they know that they'll be protected here, and as long as I'm an elected official, you'll have that protection.
Thank you. Mr. Shah?
If I understood the question correctly, it is about the Roe versus Wade and abortion rights. Am I correct?
Well, what do you think New York should do, New York State? Because this is...
New York has already codified the entire process, so people living here have no issues. So that particular thing is a different issue. But there are I have an ethical and moral dilemma with that. And it is a very interesting number, which you must bear in mind. 3,000 people lost their lives in 9/11 tragedy. And very rightfully so. We have a memorial for them. Are we aware of the fact that more than approximately 3,000 children die every day because people take a decision? 86% of the abortions are done for casual reasons. I'm thinking about it, since 1973, 60 million children have not seen their adult life or any life. How fair was life on them? How fair were we with them? This is important. This is also a dilemma of risk and responsibility. There was a time when people did not know, they did not have the methodologies to protect themselves for unwanted pregnancies. I call upon people to also be cognizant of this fact. Educate children that you're indulging in an act has consequences, because everything that we do has a consequence and impact of that. Let's be careful about educating them, the responsibility factor. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Salidi? Okay. Last question, and then we'll go to the close.
Oh, boy.
Okay. So, Mr. Jha.
Yes.
Are you concerned about the rise of extremism in New York? And what do you think should be done to address it? And I'll use that word extremism in a very loose way. You can take this how you wish.
Yeah. I come from a country where we have seen extreme violence on account of ideology or insistences or my way or highway. I've seen the violence over there. This country is peaceful. We are fortunate to be living here. But I see, since 1991 I have been here, I've seen political polarization going on. It's my way or highway. I don't belong to any extreme. I'm an independent guy smack in the middle, leaning to the right, because there is a need for law and order, discipline, because that's when things happen. I lost 50 pounds because I followed a discipline. I didn't have a tablet to sleep overnight and then lose my weight. The point is that life needs discipline. Then things happen. Today we are looking at extremism in the country because we are restricting freedom of speech. It's a very interesting dichotomy. In the name of freedom of speech, your and my freedom of speech is being restricted. That's the risk this country is running. Freedom of speech is about what, who, why, when, how, and where happen. That's what it is. If that was not the case, if we did not have the freedom to make an inquiry, ask a question, how will we move forward? That's why you are seeing extremism. People are pushing their agenda, my way or highway, you are wrong, I'm right. That must stop.
So I'm so glad that we brought up freedom of speech, because one of the freedoms that we have in this country to express our speech is at the voting booth. And I feel that that right is under assault by the extremes. January 6th, we saw people who didn't believe in a free and fair election storm our Capitol. Now, do we have those extremisms in New York? Perhaps. Do we have poll workers that are afraid to go to work, to the basics of, our elections? Yes. And that shouldn't be. I believe voting in New York should be easier, not harder. I believe that people should be able to go to the voting booth without fear of being attacked or vilified or intimidated. Misinformation is feeding the extremism. Misinformation about voting, misinformation on every subject from COVID all the way down. And I think that's the biggest problem in our country, is the misinformation that it's feeding the extremism. And, as Mr. Jha pointed out, there is extremism on both sides, but one side is not trying to undermine our democracy and overturning free and fair elections.
Okay, thank you. And now you'll have 2 minutes each for a closing statement.
Oh, we're at the closing already.
You close first, and then Mr. Jha.
Sure. So I just want to say very quickly that this has been a pleasure. This is my first time doing this with you all, so I've really enjoyed it. I grew up actually in a single-parent household. My mom did the best that she could to raise me and the values that I hold dear. My father passed away when I was very young. You've met two very different candidates tonight. Both have very, mutual respect for each other, but we both believe in different things. And everybody in this room, we may not always agree on every single issue. But at the end of the day, who do you trust on the issues that matter to you? Women's rights, voting rights, the environment, guns, public safety. I hope that you will trust me to be your voice and fight for you in Albany. I've received the endorsement from law enforcement, to environmental groups, to labor, to business council, everybody in between. They trust me to get the job done. Newsday in their recent endorsement said that I'm laser focused on constituent issues, and I believe that. I believe that I've delivered money for IDA funding, to infrastructure, sewer project, and I'm just getting started. I hope that I can count on your support in November. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jha.
Thank you, Gina, for being civil with me. It is very important to have a civilized conversation, not calling each other extreme and violent, deplorable, so I'm lucky. Thank you. That said, with me, what you get is what you see here. I'm a solution provider. I have found solutions to the problem every single time. And believe me, a Seattle-based company wanted to install a performance-based culture in their company, billion-dollar company. They needed to cut costs. We brought senior managers, 250 senior managers in a hall, and we solved the cost-cutting problem for them. They saved $7 million a year of cost without even having to take permission from anybody. I'm lucky that I'm not in politics so that I don't have to prove my credentials to you, but this is what is important for us to know. What are we looking for? Where are we today? Look at the gas prices. Look at the inflation. Look at the problem. This is my problem with Democratic Party is they aggravate the problem, make it worse, then they put a Band-Aid and they say, voila, it is solved. We fixed it. So gas prices went up to $6, came to $4, and President Biden is claiming credit for that. Hey, you put it up from there, from $1.50 or $2 to $6. So today we are printing notes and sending money and weapons to Ukraine. Nobody is thinking about the solution. People are supplying weapons to Ukraine. That country is doomed. We are supplying weapons to Ukraine, but nobody is solving the problem of Ukraine. This is ladies and gentlemen, we need a novel look at the problem. Do we want the solution? If we want the solution, we have to give up the traditional politics that is going on here. And my appeal to you is, endorsement Gina has got, congratulations. But it doesn't mean a thing. They didn't know me. That's all that is there. Once they know me, they will endorse me next time. I'm 100% sure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Because we have to be done by 10, and we have the congressional debate to go, take a very short break. We'll set up again and hopefully start in 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Two of you fight it out for which one you want.
Okay.
Just, although it looks like the same people, so you don't have to go
Yeah,
into
yeah.
But if people are
Thinning out.
viewing, they'll probably own Congress. So you want to get a shot.
Thank you, ma'am.
Say something.
Okay.
Do you want water? I'm good. Okay. Very nice to meet you. Oh, hey, how are you, ma'am?
Okay, please come into the, could I have that, please? Thank you. Could everybody come into the hall, the worship hall? We're ready to begin. The weather is tough, and I'm so pleased that so many of you have shown up tonight, because we certainly want to give everyone an opportunity to hear what our candidates have to say on the issues that matter to you, the voters. Tonight, we're holding, as our third forum of the evening, Congressional District Number 3, and the two candidates are George Santos and Robert Zimmerman. Pleased to welcome you both, and we look forward to what you have to say. Right now, I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to turn this meeting over to our moderator, who will conduct the session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again. And I think we have a repeat crowd, right? So I'm not repeating all the rules again. We've done that. So gentlemen, you have to hear a little bit of the rules. Basically, you agreed to the guidelines. The guidelines are on the easel out in the galley. 2 minutes opening statement. Mr. Santos, I think you pulled for number one. Mr. Zimmerman, you'd be second on the opening. A minute and a half for each of the questions, and then the close again in that order. You would close first for 2 minutes, and you would close second for 2 minutes. The audience knows we'll applaud at the beginning, we'll applaud at the end. They will try really, really, really hard not to interrupt, because it takes away from your time. Okay? We appreciate your being here. There are questions that were prepared in advance. We're also getting questions up here. If you have any, please submit them in the next 15 minutes, because otherwise I can't feed them in with the other questions. But we'd like to hear a variety of statements and opinions from you both. People are here to learn. People will be viewing it afterwards to learn about your positions. So civility rules, please, okay? We don't have rebuttal time. However, again, take notes. Your closing statement is what you want to make of it. You can use it to bring home some points that you feel are important for people to leave with. So, without further ado, why don't we start with, first, we'll cheer. They're here. And Mr. Santos, 2 minutes for your opening statement, please.
Well, thank you very much. My name is George Santos. I'm a 34-year-old, first-generation born American, and only in this country does somebody with my background have the ability to be having the awesome opportunity to run for United States Congress. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands this isn't about me. This isn't about my opponent. This is about everyone in this room. This race is about your livelihoods, your safety, the affordability of our country, the future of our children, the future of our grandchildren. I want to make sure that everybody in this room understands. I want to go to Washington, D.C. to represent you, to be your partner, to be part of the community, your voice. I want to fight for the American dream, the same American dream that my family came here in search of, the same American dream that I live today, and the same American dream that is under siege. We've learned that irresponsible administrations and irresponsible governance leads to chaos, and that's what we're experiencing. Crime is out of control. It's absolutely dangerous for our kids to commute to work, to go out and have some fun. The cost of energy is out of control. It will be 3 times more expensive this year to heat our homes for the winter. It is more expensive by 2x to fill up our gas tanks to commute to work. And let's not forget that inflation is out of control, and every single American is experiencing a 10% pay cut, whether you like it or not, because our current administration does not understand how to govern responsibly without overspending and going above and beyond to do everything that they should not be doing. So I want everybody in this room to know that those are my grounds, those are my rules, that's what I will work to deliver for you all. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Zimmerman, your opening statement.
Good evening. First, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for bringing us together and give a special shout out to my Great Neck League of Women Voters. So excited they've brought back their chapter and it's thriving and moving forward. Now, we were asked to describe ourselves for those who are visually impaired before we speak. So let me just say very quickly, I'm wearing a navy blue suit, American flag pin on my lapel. I'm 5'9.5". I'd like to say 5'10", but it's the league and I got to be straight. I have salt and pepper hair, quite frankly, more salt than pepper. And George Santos is the better looking one of the two of us. That being said, I want to thank the league for bringing us together tonight at a very critical time, both in this campaign and in our nation's history. In fact, John Meacham, the presidential historian, said this may be the most defining midterm election since the Civil War. In this contest in our 3rd congressional district, it's really a competition and a test of the two values and the two principles that George and I bring together. You know, George has said this election is not about us. Well, in many ways, it's about the values and beliefs and principles that we bring to this congressional district, the principles that we bring to represent you. I'm very proudly a strong advocate of reproductive freedom for women and respecting their personal autonomy and standing up for their reproductive rights. Regrettably, George Santos supports a national ban on abortions with no exceptions, even for New Yorkers, advocates criminalizing, prosecuting doctors and nurses who provide abortion care. I stand for public safety and stand in support of our police. Regrettably, George Santos attended the Stop the Steal rally and actually bragged about paying the legal fees for the insurrectionists whose violence that day resulted in 5 police officers dying. I believe in working in a bipartisan way. That's why I stand in support of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, so critical to all of us. Regrettably, George does not. I look forward to discussing these ideas with you this evening.
Thank you. So, Mr. Zimmerman, the first question,
Sure.
90 seconds to you. And again, just to clarify, the timers have a 30-second triangle. They're going to leave it up so you know, because people look at their notes. We want to make sure you realize so you can finish up with your sentence at the 2 minutes. I'm sorry, 1.5 minutes. So we heard one of you already address this, but it's the #1 question on the list that was given to me. With Senator Graham introducing a bill to nationally restrict abortion, it's clear that women's reproductive health is on the docket for the next Congress. How would you vote on his bill? If yes, are there any parts of the Dobbs decision that you vote to overturn? If no, what other legislation would you support to ensure Americans don't lose privacy rights? Mr. Zimmerman first, then Mr. Santos.
Let me be very clear with you. There's no part of the Dobbs decision I respect or support. I would vote in Congress to codify Roe v. Wade. It is absolutely essential because, frankly, the Dobbs decision puts women's lives at risk. In fact, women will die because of that decision. And the bigger concern I have on top of that is that we have to understand the Dobbs decision also opens up a whole range of other cases coming forward that will impact, potentially, marriage equality. I'm a gay man, and I see what it does in terms of impacting my personal privacy. I see what it does in terms of impacting so many other freedoms and personal liberties we have. And frankly, Justice Clarence Thomas laid that out in his opinion, that it would, in fact, lead to overturning so many important achievements for the LGBTQ plus community and also infringe upon contraceptive rights. So let's be very clear. I will work very hard to codify Roe v. Wade if elected. I will support the Women's Health Protection Act because when I'm standing up for reproductive freedom for women, I'm standing up for women's health. I'm standing up for the right to privacy. I'm standing up for the gay community. I'm standing up for personal freedom and liberty.
Thank you. Mr. Santos, same question?
As far as the Dobbs decision goes, I believe that the Supreme Court did the right thing by giving the power back to the states and letting each and every state decide for themselves. When you bring issues back to the states, the people have more power. The voice of the people are heard better and louder at local government. This is an empowering moment for women all across the country to advocate for what they believe is best for them. In the state of New York, nothing will change. Nobody's rights are at risk. Nobody's freedoms are at risk in the state of New York. Again, unlike my opponent who likes to put words in my mouth every single time we sit together, I don't do the same for him. I talk about facts. He likes to fabricate and misguide the public into talking for me. So I'll remain the course of focusing on everyone here, and I will remain on the course of not going into distractions and making sure that everybody in this room knows nothing changes for you in New York State. I will support the decision of the Supreme Court to maintain the Dobbs decision deferred back to the states, where the 10th Amendment is upheld and each and every person will be able to fight for what they believe in. And we see that in New York. Nothing's going to change, and I'll remain to be that way. As far as Lindsey Graham's bill, I will not vote for it. It is no longer a federal matter.
Thank you. Mr. Santos, the next question starts with you. By all measures, the U.S. economy is headed for a recession. To tame the skyrocketing cost of gas, heating fuel, groceries, etc., interest rates have been hiked to cool demand. If the recession lasts longer than a couple of months, what legislative actions would you consider?
We need to end the war on producing energy in the United States. That is the cause of our inflation. That is what is leading this country into a recession. Make no mistake, let it be clear, my opponent will be a rubber stamp for that same agenda that will continue to hurt each and every one of you in this room. 10% of inflation is a 10% pay cut in each and every one of your pockets. What we need to work towards is producing energy domestically. We're the cleanest place on earth to produce energy. We have EPA standards in local, state, and federal levels. And we're able to produce that energy, create jobs. We're able to also deliver an economy of which we won't be reliant on foreign energy. For instance, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela. These are nations who have committed humanitarian crimes, and we want to go support them financially now. So this is what this administration is doing, is essentially empowering people who have a long history of criminal activity, and that's exactly what my opponent is for. I believe in renewable energy, I believe in a green economy, but I don't believe in absolutism, and I do not believe in extremism, unlike my opponent who wants to extremely eradicate fossil fuel. So this is why we're in the mess we're in today, and this is what I will propose in Congress.
Mr. Zimmerman.
First, George, let me just say I'm not putting words in your mouth when I quote your record. I'm actually putting the words that come out of your mouth in numerous television interviews and radio interviews and newspaper interviews you've done. And it's important to do that because this election is about choices. It's about choices that are going to impact our future as a nation, impact our future here on Long Island. When I talk about inflation, this is not a political or partisan debate to me. I'm a small business owner for 33 years. I know what inflation means, both to small business owners, to young people, to families trying to get back on track after COVID, and to our seniors. And so there are several steps that have to be taken I think are critical in the short term. First, we have to find ways to lower costs. I support a national gas tax holiday. I think that's essential. I think also, quite frankly, I was very proudly a supporter of the legislation that was just signed into law that reduced the cost of prescription drugs for our seniors on Medicare. So, in fact, insulin was capped at $35 a month, and out-of-pocket prescription drugs were capped at $2,000 a year. Still too high, but it was coming down. That was a piece of legislation that George opposed. I support the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is essential for creating jobs and reinvesting in our economy, essential for protecting our water supply in our region, and in fact, protecting the Long Island Sound. Regrettably, George opposed that as well. So these are critical steps, and as a member of Congress, I would be addressing price gouging, because the profits that are being raked in by various industries, including oil and the meatpacking
do you consider the events of January 6th an insurrection, or was there any justification?
You know, it is really one of the most important issues that faces our nation, because the whole debate around the Stop the Steal issue about the election results is nothing more than a political effort to undermine our democracy, diminish, really violate, if not destroy our Constitution for political gain. It was a very tragic period for our nation. And it's an issue that truly provides a very stark difference between George Santos and myself. Donald Trump's own top advisors, his Attorney General, his Director of Election Security, his FBI director, all said the election was free and fair and secure, and there wasn't any level of corruption that would have overturned it. Yet George Santos participated in the big lie, attended the Stop the Steal rally, actually defended on video the right of the insurrectionists to be in the Capitol. The people who were literally running through the halls, chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," and building a gallows to hang him. Engaging in such terrible violence that I mentioned 5 police officers died. And even when he lost his election against Tom Suozzi by 13%, he claimed that was also stolen from him. Let's be very clear. Protecting our democracy is essential. Making sure that we have, and this is really what comes down to, making sure we always put our Constitution and our electoral process ahead of political ambition and political gain. That's my commitment to you.
Mr. Santos.
Again, my opponent continues to speak for me and put words in my mouth. I think it's amazing how he makes this all about him and myself. I acknowledge Joe Biden as the rightful winner of the election, not the choice I made at the ballot box, and I stand by that today, specifically in the state of our country. I think I made the right choice not voting for Joe Biden. However, it's worthy to note that I never declined the results of the 2020 election. I never supported violence on January 6th. As a matter of fact, I was the first Republican to come out on a public platform on Twitter and say it was a dark day in our country. We needed healing from that point on. Unlike my opponent, who as late as 2016 was denying the 2000 election, saying that Al Gore won the election while he was campaigning for Joe Biden. He likes to keep that a secret, but he's an election denier far longer than most people in this room who might believe that. He's a trendsetter himself, so I applaud him for having the audacity to say that I declined the results of the election in 2020. Joe Biden won the election. He wasn't my choice. However, I respect the fact that he holds the office of President of the United States. I respect the office of the President of the United States, and I want him to be successful because his success is the success of every single person in this room and every single person in this country. And I wish him nothing but the best, and I hope he starts to change his attitude and guide us in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Mr. Santos, you'll start with this. With crime surging, law enforcement has been spotlighted. Does reducing crime require more spending on policing? What have you done to support law enforcement in the past, and what policies will you support for in Congress to reduce crime?
I have stood by law enforcement side by side in the front lines throughout the 2020 demoralization of our law enforcement officers in this country. Matter of fact, I'm the law and order backed candidate in this race, endorsed by every major PBA organization in Nassau County. They unanimously stand behind me because they know I have their back. They know that crime is an epidemic caused by the Democrat Party. My opponent, for instance, is a big funder of Senator Todd Kaminsky, who is the author of bail reform. Matter of fact, gave him $1,000 to support his election for top cop of Nassau County just last year in 2021. And to add insult to injury, he likes to say that I support cop killers. That is a blatant lie, and he should be ashamed of himself for ever suggesting such a thing after all the advocacy work I've done with police unions and all the advocacy work I've done with police benevolent associations. I stand proud to say I am the law and order candidate in this contest, and I will support law enforcement by securing federal funding when every time a local municipality decides to defund the police, I will go to Washington, D.C. and bring them back federal dollars to make sure that our kids are safe, to make sure that every woman and man in this room is safe when they're commuting to and from work or they're engaging in public activities, so they don't need to be worried about crime in our state or in our congressional district.
Mr. Zimmer?
You know, this issue of public safety and law is so important, and respecting the legal processes in our country is so critical. I just want to refer back to something George said, in that, yes, I did protest the election results in 2000, but unlike George, when the Supreme Court made their decision, I accepted it, and Al Gore conceded. So it's a very important distinction. It's called respecting our electoral process and our constitutional process. Likewise here, let me be very clear with you. I have taken on the extremes in my party, and both extremes actually, in both parties, in terms of standing up in opposition to defunding the police. I've condemned it. I have been a strong advocate for for the fixes in the bail reform, demanding that more judges have greater discretion in awarding penalties and sentencing defendants. Looking at defendants' history, I've stood up and demanded that hate crimes be given not an appearance ticket, but judges have the authority to enforce the full penalty of the law in addressing hate crimes. In fact, because of my leadership for public safety, I've been endorsed by former New York City Commissioner Bill Bratton. And one of the most important ways that in Congress we can ensure public safety is by putting in strong and safe and effective gun safety legislation. It is long overdue. We ban assault weapons, and quite frankly, we have heroes here for gun safety, like Lois Schaefer and Michelle Schimmel, our former Assemblywoman. Both have been champions for gun safety legislation, and unlike George doesn't think we need new laws to deal with gun violence, I believe we do.
Thank you. And Mr. Zimmerman, the next question starts with you. Climate-related disasters are increasingly harming the health of Americans. What specific actions will you advocate for to increase the resilience of communities in the face of climate change and to protect community health from climate-related extreme events? Please include what you would support for historically disadvantaged and vulnerable communities. And actually, I'd like to give the gentleman an extra 30 seconds, give them 2 minutes, because you haven't touched on this anywhere yet.
Okay.
And I think it's an important topic to get your opinions on. So, Mr. Zimmerman? Yeah.
The first step is we have to recognize the climate crisis is real. We've got to respect science, respect the reality of the facts. There isn't a community in our congressional district that hasn't been impacted by severe weather. Businesses being damaged, homes being flooded, some destroyed. In fact, in the borough of Queens, 11 people died living in substandard apartments because of the flooding that took place a year and a half ago. This is a threat to our national security. It's a threat to our public safety. It's a threat to our quality of life and our future. So I see this as one of the great threats that the world's facing, that we're facing. And so, frankly, I think there are a number of important steps we would take. I strongly supported the most recent legislation that was passed. That was the greatest investment in clean energy union jobs. We have to be prepared to transfer. And they can't do it overnight. I understand in the short term we have to rely upon fossil fuel, and for that matter, domestic drilling is up to 12 million barrels a day, almost the 2019 levels. I don't celebrate that, but in the short term we have to deal with fossil fuel. But in the long term, we've got to expedite permits for solar, wind, turbo, hydropower. Why are we buying solar panels from China? We have to reinvest in domestic manufacturing in our country, so we're prepared for the renewable economy, and we're prepared to deal with the climate crisis. And likewise, so many communities communities that are disadvantaged face extreme dangers. We have to make sure that we reinvest in housing, so that these areas are retrofitted, and we deal with. That's why, for example, I supported the bipartisan infrastructure bill, because that's money it's going in for our sewer systems. It's going in to make sure that we can, in fact, deal with flooding that is especially impacting lower-income communities and impacting the housing stock in these communities. So those are some of the steps I would take that I think are critical to move forward.
Thank you. Mr. Santos?
Recently, a couple of years ago in 2019, the Army engineers wanted to install a floodgate under the Throgs Neck Bridge, which would cause flooding for the people of North Hempstead. I'm not a town of North Hempstead resident. However, I stood in lockstep with everybody in the town of North Hempstead to make sure that was not installed, and we fended them off. That would have caused chaos and disaster for the people living in the water, surrounding waters. Climate is a cycle. We've gone through numerous ice ages, and we have been able to come back as a planet. It's a fact. You can look at me all you want, Robert. It's a fact. So the reality is what my opponent doesn't like to address is the fact that you can do all you want and you can do all the virtue signaling. The reality is at what cost? Yes, I want clean air. Yes, I want clean water. Yes, I support infrastructure to stop seepage into the Long Island Sound. Yes, I support all those things. But at the end of the day, the reality is the Democrat Party is in one-party rule in Washington, D.C. They have had the opportunity for the last 20 months to perform and deliver on all their promises on climate change, and yet they have delivered nothing substantial, nothing that has materialized, and nothing that has caused or started to roll into a result towards climate change. So again, I'm not perfect. I don't think my opponent is, but I really want to see the Democrat Party step up to the plate and deliver on their promises on climate change.
Okay, thank you. We've already started talking about things Mr. Santos.
Well, it's simple. You need to go into Washington, D.C., and you need to stop the wasteful spending. There's bills that are funded in D.C. through ominous spending bills that make absolute no sense. I'll give a quick example on a very interesting bill. There was a bill passed, meshed in as pork, for an ominous spending bill earlier this year that included gender studies, a total of $20 million for gender studies on primates in the country of Pakistan. This is a fact. That is wasteful spending. That is money that can be spent in public safety. That is money that could be spent in infrastructure. That is money that should be spent in our districts, in our country. We are the country that wastes the most amount of taxpayer dollars. It is time that we stop the wasteful spending and we start delivering results and bringing the money back to our districts. Democrats have a long history of overspending our money and putting us into further financial chaos. I believe that we go there, we start cutting spending on wasteful and reappropriating it towards things that make sense, towards actionable results that will deliver immediate results to the communities. It's a common sense thing to say. I'm not saying that I'm going to remove lifelines or anything. I'm just suggesting we look at what's real and what's not, what's urgent and what's not, and that's how we bring the money back for the various projects we're talking about.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Zimmerman.
Well, George and I both agree we're all against wasteful spending. And that's been the mantra from Washington for generations. Now let's deal with the issue seriously. And let's deal with the issue intelligently. Of course we don't want to have wasteful spending. But we also have to recognize when spending is relevant and essential for investing in our nation. The infrastructure bill that was put forward that I support, that George does not, that was a very critical investment in terms of building our economy, in terms of retrofitting sewage treatment plants, building our roads, addressing bridge issues with the construction of our bridges, making sure we can reinvest to make sure we can protect our water supply, deal with the unfunded mandates that so many water districts have to face. So that's one critical effort. Most recently, there was a bill passed that just signed into law recently. It was the largest investment in dealing with the climate crisis in the history of our nation. So, George, when you talk about where are the results, that's one action the Democrats took. I'm glad you want to see action taken. But that was the largest investment in dealing with the climate crisis in our nation's history. That was actually a piece of legislation that also reduced the cost of prescription drugs and lowered health care costs as well, health care premiums. The way it was paid for was they went to the top corporations earning over $1 billion, and they raised the corporate tax by a modest amount. I guarantee you those corporations aren't going out of business, but they're finally paying a bit of their fair share so that we can build a stronger economy, an economy addressing the energy crisis, and we can begin to provide some relief for our senior citizens.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Zimmerman again. On money, New York sends more money to Washington than gets back. For both of you, actually, if elected as a member of Congress, can you do anything about it? Would you advocate for something in particular?
Well, actually, I've got a fun fact for you. For the first time that anyone can recall, New York actually got back more this year under Senator Schumer's leadership than we actually paid in. That's a remarkable, I think it was a modest amount, but we got more money back than we paid in. And that's this is based upon the Pat Moynihan model, where he outlined how New York pays far more into our country than we get back in return. But there are several steps I think I would take. First and foremost is restoring the state and local tax deduction. That is absolutely essential. It was outrageous it was ever taken away from us. And by denying it to us, it is a double taxation that we're all facing. So restoring the state and local tax deductions, very, very critical. So that's the first step I would take. Secondly, I think we have to also expand upon many of the programs and services. We have unique needs in the state of New York because of our size, because of the fact that we're a destination that the world wants to be in. And under Senator Schumer's leadership and with Congressman Swazi's leadership, we did receive more federal aid back and more federal support for our programs and services. So I think that's got to be done too. It's a tough issue, let's face it. The Congress, and in particular, Republican partisans have, in fact, Ron DeSantis voted against federal aid to us after Superstorm Sandy. Then, of course, he came to the Democratic leadership and asked for support after their tragic hurricane, which New York Democrats stood up and provided support for. We have to be able to, by working in a coalition, make sure that we get more aid back for our needs and services in the state.
Thank you. Mr. Santos, same question.
Mr. Zimmerman and I don't agree ever most on issues, but we both agree on the SALT deduction. It is a right that should be restored, and I've been on the front lines and advocating for the SALT reinstatement because we are amongst the highest taxed areas in the country. It is absolutely unfair and uncalled for that we are penalized, period. It was a bad political decision on the former administration. I stood up for it. I stood up to it. It was my own party. But again, that's because that transcends party lines, and my loyalty is with the people, not with my party. I will stand up to them at every given opportunity. We need to fight. We need to fight to bring more money back into New York State. New York State is in a unique position. It is a large state. It is a large footprint and a large demographic. And in fact, yes, the whole world wants to be us so bad that they're crawling over each other in the southern border and making their way up here. So that's a reality. That's flooding our infrastructure. That's flooding our schools. That's taking away from our children. That's taking away from every service that we have access to. The reality, let's be very clear. We need representatives that will speak up, that will stand up to fight for New York. I'm that fighter. I fought my entire career, my entire life to go from that kid in the basement apartment of Jackson Heights to being able to be a successful businessman running for Congress in the United States of America. I will not deliver short of that in the House of Representatives when fighting for funding for our district.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, Mr. Santos. The only Americans happy with our health system are usually healthy. What legislative reforms might tame prices that are increasing faster than other sectors, price gouging and profits higher than other sectors, burnout that is driving doctors and nurses out of their professions, and medical debt burdening 40% of Americans, not to mention most Americans not having access to routine health care? What would you do to enlarge public and congressional support for what you favor?
As far as health care goes in our country, we have a fundamental problem with health care in the United States. The United States has been relying almost by 40% largely on emergency medicine. That means people are only going to see a healthcare provider when they're in a state of emergency and they show up at the emergency room. That is the highest form of healthcare in our country, due to when hospitals deem it's an emergency and they get to charge essentially what they feel like. It's not regulated. That's because Congress has failed to come to a consensus to create a program, a tier program, where people pay what they can afford to receive health care, right? A lot of people like to compare that, a tier system, to Obamacare, but Obamacare failed because in its algorithm, it failed to equate cost of living, demographic, area in which that health care recipient is receiving health care. For instance, somebody receiving health care in the city of New York has a much higher cost of living and can afford a lot less of their income to pay back into the Obamacare than compared to somebody living in rural Kentucky who they may have a much smaller cost of living. We need to hold Big Pharma accountable. We need to hold hospital and medical providers accountable. That's why I want to make sure and make it clear. I do not accept money from lobbyists in the pharma industry. I do not accept money from pharmaceutical companies and corporate PACs in pharma, because I want them to remember me as their worst nightmare when they wake up and go to sleep, because I will not be bought by them.
I had asked you please not to interrupt. We need to get to as many topics as possible. Thank you. Mr. Zimmerman.
George did a very good job laying out the problems. Let's talk about solutions. And yes, the arguments he laid out against the arguments he laid out against the Affordable Care Act, that's what you heard from the right wing against Medicare. That's what you heard from them about Social Security, for that matter. But we are dealing with a health care crisis in our country. Let's not in any way minimize that. It certainly became increasingly worse during the healthcare pandemic, when literally 23 million people lost their healthcare coverage because they lost their jobs. It's a challenge we have to face from a humanitarian level and from an economic level. That's why I support Medicare for all, because we have to guarantee a baseline level of health care for every citizen in this country. That doesn't mean you put the health insurance industries out of business. People could treat Medicare for all like people handle Medicare today. Medicare is a baseline coverage, and people can buy supplemental insurance as they see fit, as many people do. But that's an essential first step we have to put in place. We also have to make sure that Medicare is protected and enhanced, as is Social Security. And that's a real debate in this next Congress. George Santos has advocated privatizing Social Security. That would end the system as we know it. Republicans talk about in the Congress the idea of putting up Medicare for renewal every 5 years. That's unacceptable. And we still know that they're still working to abolish the Affordable Care Act with the improvements it put in place, including making sure people with pre-existing conditions were covered. So we have to build upon the past successes, and there are real solutions we can put in place to get that done.
Thank you. We talked earlier about crime and police funding law enforcement, but a lot of the questions have related to the concern about both as a result of social media and rumors, potentially an offshoot of the January 6th event. Could you speak to that issue, Mr. Zimmerman?
Our FBI director, appointed by President Trump, still in the position under President Biden, made the point that domestic terrorism is one of our probably our number one threat in terms of national security, led by white supremacy. Think about that for a moment, what that threat represents. And we have to be able to address that by, in fact, and I've been a strong advocate of this, taking on the extremes in my own party. We have to increase our support for police. We've got to be able to reinvest in our police to provide them better equipment, better opportunities, and better training to deal with, for example, with hate crimes that we see rising to a tragic level, confronting so many segments of our society. We have to be able to provide much stronger oversight of social media and the way it's being used to spread misinformation and destroy people's minds, pollute people's minds. So we have to recognize that domestic terrorism is a very real threat. We have to recognize what white supremacy means, and we've got to stand up to extremism. Regrettably, George Santos has embraced Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's the QAnon congresswoman, and he put out the woman who's even been denounced by her own Republican leadership for her hateful rhetoric. And he put out on Twitter, he regards her as a personal friend. He likes her better than a lot of other Republicans. We've got to stand up to the kind of hateful, divisive rhetoric that we've heard from Marjorie Taylor Greene and those who embrace extremists and empower them.
Mr. Santos.
My opponent is obsessed with me, I'm convinced. The reality is clear. Extremism comes from Letitia James. Extremism comes from accepting an endorsement of the Working Families Party, as my opponent has accepted, who makes you take a pledge to denounce and defund the police. That is the party that my opponent has accepted the endorsement from. Make no mistake, Extremism is a cancer, and I will root it out, and I will work along law enforcement to root it out of our communities, out of our society, and I will work diligently to eradicate that from our country. It is not up for negotiation. We can do that by funding. Instead of funding 87,000 IRS agents and weaponizing them against the middle class of the United States, we can go fund police task force to go look and go through social media and to go into mental facilities and make sure that people aren't being let out without proper diagnosis, so that they don't go out into the streets and create and cause crimes and commit crimes of acts of horror against us. The reality is, my opponent has decided to align himself with every single extreme fringe person in the Democrat Party, from our lieutenant governor and our governor, who refuses to unseat the Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, who refuses to literally prosecute criminals. And he's accepted the endorsement of the Working Families Party, and he's funded Todd Kaminsky to become the top cop of Nassau County, the man who authored bail reform and made us less safe. Talk about extremism and terrorism.
Okay, Mr. Santos. One of you referred to immigration earlier, and I'd like to explore not just immigration policy, and most of the noise we hear is about the border, about immigrants being bused or flown to, quote, sanctuary cities, other parts of the country, but also we keep hearing about the economy and the need for more workers, and legitimately admitted immigrants with special visas are also not being allowed in. The foreign student count is down at universities, and they're losing money. So I'd like each of you to speak to the economic side of the immigration debate as well. So Mr. Santos, if you would start.
Legal, qualified immigration is encouraged. That's how my parents came here. That's a result of our country. That's how most of you came here. That's what America's about. I stand for legal, qualified labor. I stand for legal immigration. I have no opposition to legal immigration or to bringing in temporary visas, working visa recipients into our country to help us in various sectors of our economy. The only problem that we have is the immigration system is flooded with the floodgates that are taking place in the southern border, hence creating a backlog on allowing the immigration agency to be able to perform their duties to admit people, to submit, to accept visas, to issue visas. It's chaotic what's going on in our country. The administration has its priorities upside down. And the reality is I've always encouraged legal immigration. My opponent's going to probably say something along the lines of that I want to build a wall of Jerusalem around the country. I don't know what he's going to say, but I just want to set the record straight that this is going to be the most consequential election, because it is between a person who understands finance and economics and is somebody who wants to just virtue signal and dog whistle and spew hate and rhetoric just like my opponent does.
Mr. Zimmerman, your turn.
What it's really about in this debate is about facts, reality, and putting our statements and our positions on the record for both of you, for all of you to judge. Just a year and a half ago, George Santos was actually advocating ending for a period of time legal immigration. Now he says he supports legal immigration. I'm glad to see that he's changed his point of view on that. But in order to have an open, fair election, we have an obligation to be honest with you about our positions and consistent in expressing our positions to you. That's why, frankly, sometimes I've got to bring up where George and I differ and where our records differ, because that's how you make an informed decision. Let me be very clear. The issue of immigration historically has been a bipartisan issue. At one point, there were 68 votes in the Senate to deal with the immigration crisis. John McCain and Lindsey Graham working with the Obama administration. Peter King, for example, Republican conservative Congress member from Long Island, actually advocates a pathway for citizenship for the undocumented who are living in our country, in addition to advocating border security. Very frankly, my position is clear. I have always been, and they're going back to 2006, a strong advocate for border security. That's essential for our society. We also have to have a pathway for undocumented people living in our country to achieve citizenship, and we have to improve our asylum system. The people who are here being shipped in buses are here legally. They came here to claim asylum. That's in our Constitution. But we have to have more judges process these cases faster because the backlog has grown to over 700,000. I think the Biden administration's got to do a lot more in terms of addressing that issue.
Okay, Mr. Zimmerman, the given current rate, some legislators to seek to reduce funding to vital programs that serve children and vulnerable families. These programs include the Maternal and Child Health Bureau that helps provide maternal and newborn care, and nutritional programs like SNAP and WIC. What is your level of commitment to maintaining or increasing funding for these vital programs?
They're absolutely more essential than ever before, especially as in this difficult economic time we're facing as a nation. You know, it's a very curious thing. When the Trump tax bill was put through, the Trump tax cuts were put through a couple of years back, and Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy said, don't worry, it'll pay for itself. It produced a deficit of between $1.5 trillion to $2 trillion. No one complains, no, you don't hear any Republicans complaining about that debt, about the deficit it created. But they're the first ones to kill the child tax credit that would put bring 30% of our children living in poverty out of poverty. Or they go after SNAP, or they talk about ways to cut Medicare. Or like George, they advocate privatizing Social Security. Let's understand what's at stake in our society right now. It's important for us to come together as a community to protect our middle class, to build a stronger middle class. And that doesn't mean you target programs that, in fact, will make it more difficult for people to live in this economic crisis. It means we have to, in fact, make sure that those corporations at the top tier pay their fair share, and make sure, in fact, that there's greater accountability so these programs are protected and they're implemented fairly and accurately.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Santos?
Welfare is a lifeline, and it's a lifeline that I would never bring to defund or to underfund. I do believe that the welfare system needs an audit to stop wasteful spending so that the people who truly need the assistance and the lifeline that it's created and to support have it when they need it. That is what's at stake. The difference is we can either close our eyes and pretend that it runs well, or we can open our eyes and audit it, fix it, repurpose the funding that is being wasted on fraudulent claims for assistance. That is what takes place in that system. Look, as a child, as a kid who came from a household who received welfare at one point, I can tell you there's nothing more powerful to get off of it and do something with your life and be able to be successful and pay taxes back into the system to contribute to that same system that helped you and your family. So under no circumstances would I ever attack welfare. I would never attack any of the lifelines. We need to help people when they need it the most, and that's what this program is there for, but we need to be responsible, audit it, and make sure that the right people are the recipients of the program so that there's no advantage being taken in the system.
Thank you. We have time for one more short question, one line, and then we'll go to the closing statements. Sure, okay. So, Mr. Santos, if you are elected, what one policy or reform will you dedicate yourself to every day?
The one bill that I have ingrained that I want to bring to the next docket is to end the bonanza of insider trading in Washington, D.C. Every single person in this room is affected by the fact that the House of Representatives and its members are too worried about special interest. I want to present a bill in the next Congress to ban individual stock trading for members of Congress, their spouses, and their immediate family members to end the nonsense and end the party. Party's over. Because the moment you do that, the job becomes a lot less interesting, and they're going to have to focus on us, we, the people of the United States, and work for us, and deliver results for us, and lower our taxes, and increase the quality of life for our children, and create opportunity for our children, and better our education system. Education is a springboard out of poverty. I am a witness to that. I am proof of that. the American dream must be defended at all costs. So I will fight to end special interests in Washington, D.C., and make Congress work for us.
Thank you. Mr. Zimmerman?
Well, you know, the first way you fight special interests in Washington, D.C. is make a personal pledge that you'll put your assets into a blind trust if you're elected. I've made that pledge to do so. Plus, I will sell my business back to my business partners, and so I'll be totally out of my business as well. I support the legislation that would, in fact, ban insider trading, but more than that, or ban stock trading by members of Congress, but more than that, I've made a pledge not to take any corporate political action committee money. George talks about the pharmaceutical industry. How about all the other industries? Because the system right now in Washington is members of Congress bankroll their campaigns from the very industries they have to oversee and regulate. So I've taken a pledge that most members of Congress have not taken, where I will not take corporate money, corporate political action committee money in any form for my campaign. Now, to your point, I think it's so important to bring up, my major mission in my first term in Congress is making sure the funds that have been appropriated are allocated back here to our constituents in the 3rd Congressional District. Congress is very big on appropriating money, but then how do we make sure the funds for the infrastructure bill come back here? How do we make sure the support systems that we need for our communities come back here? That's my mission, to make sure that we can deliver. And frankly, I have a history of working in a bipartisan way with Republicans, both in local government and in Congress. Peter King in particular, and Don Clavin, the Hempstead supervisor. George, I don't think you can point to one Democrat in Congress or one Democratic local official that will ever say you made any effort to work in a bipartisan way to deliver results for our communities.
Okay, gentlemen, you have 2 minutes. I know you'd like to have 10 minutes, but it's 2 minutes. Make your closing statement. Sell yourself. Get their vote. Mr. Santos.
I'm going first.
Yep, it's the same order.
I just want...
Yeah, wait a minute. Yeah, same order as the beginning.
I just wanted to thank everybody for coming out. Politics is boring. This is a tedious process. I appreciate your participation and your engagement. I do want to remember, this campaign is about you. Every aspect of my campaign is about each and every one of you, and I will remain that way when I have the awesome honor to represent you in New York's 3rd Congressional District. But don't kid yourself. You have a choice to make. The choice is simple. My opponent tonight highlighted that he wants to create a national gas tax holiday, which would increase inflation. He would like to have a Medicare for All plan, which would increase inflation. He's also in the past advocates for a $50,000 student debt relief, which would add over $500 billion into the national debt. I want to reduce inflation. I want to deliver a simple life. I want to deliver affordability. I want to deliver prosperity. I want your children and your grandchildren to experience the same American dream my family and I experienced. I want to make sure that that's protected. I want to make sure that you all understand that in me, you'll have a fighter. The same kid who went from the basement in Jackson Heights all the way to working in the financial services industry, and today is able to have the awesome opportunity to run for United States Congress. Only in this country, and I want to remain this country that same way, and my commitment to you that I will be your partner, your friend, and your biggest advocate in Washington, D.C., in the sea of corruption and dismay that place is. So I thank you very much for being here. I thank you very much for your participation, and I thank you very much for taking the time to deal with two guys here just trying to sell themselves to everyone else. So I appreciate you very much.
Hold your applause, though. We're going to applaud at the end. Okay. Mr. Zimmerman.
Yes, I want to thank the League as well for bringing us all together this evening at such a defining time in our country's history. And you know, George says this election's about you. I see it a little differently. This election is about what George and I would do for you, what we stand for, what we believe in. I don't think you can just try to hide from the issues or hide from taking positions by just saying, well, it's just up to you. It's up to how we can best serve you. That's the real issue here. And in fact, you know, we talk a lot about the American dream. Let me tell you what my American dream is. My American dream is having a Congress that will stand up to the epidemic of gun violence in our nation and ban assault weapons, and put in place stronger background checks, put in place efforts to red flag laws nationally, and make sure that we can address finally the pandemic of gun violence throughout our nation. That's my American dream. My American dream is respecting personal privacy, standing up for reproductive freedom for women, standing up for the rights of the LGBTQ+ community, standing up for individuals' freedoms to love and live how they choose. My American dream is about recognizing science is there and we put real concrete programs in place to deal with the climate crisis. My American dream is defined by standing up to protect our democracy and our Constitution and respecting the right of the voter and listening to the will of the American people. We have got to stop rationalizing and excusing those who want to embrace extremism, those who want to empower extremism to overturn elections for political gain. It is one of our greatest threats to our society. So I look forward to an America with our best days ahead, and I know we're facing tough times. But by standing up for each other, by working together, as we have, and I have throughout my life in a bipartisan way, we can build coalitions that can deliver services we used to in our country. I've done that in my life. As I mentioned, I've done that with Peter King on the 9/11 Zaroga relief bill. I've done that on the pandemic, working with Republican governments and Democratic governments on Long Island, because by working together, working in a bipartisan way, we can truly help achieve the American dream. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, man. Good job. Good job.
Don't forget to take some of the literature on the tables too about the league.